What's going on, everybody? What's happening? What's shaking? What's doing? This is episode 202 of Two Dudes and Some Bullshit. My name's Dave McCrae, coming to you live from the Voice Band Studios in Toronto, Canada. He's Tony Michael in Atlanta, Georgia. Hulk Hogan, the legendary, immortal Hulk Hogan, has passed away. We're going to talk about it tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live! We are live for episode 202. Hulk Hogan, Terry Boella? Terry Boella, I think. Anyway, he's gone. He's dead. Good night, everybody. No. Welcome to episode 202 of... I was going to say welcome to episode, because I'm looking at the chat here, or at the title of the show. Welcome to episode 202 of Hulk Hogan. I meant episode 202 of Two Dudes and Some Bullshit. Tony Michael, how are you? Welcome to the show. It's been a tough week for us Gen Xers, as you were saying before we went
as
live.
you would say, well, let me tell you, brother.
Let me tell you something, brother.
I can't do that with my vocals, no way. But,
man.
Yeah. I mean, if I did a speedball or something, probably.
Dude, some of those old Macho Man and Hogan, like, I laugh when it looks like they're on like cocaine. I'll tell you something, brother. Ooh, listen here.
Work for me, brother.
It's not gonna work. The cream rises to the top. Oh yeah, like holy shit! Lay off the coke, guys.
Yeah, I think it's Bolea, by the way.
Bolea, that's it. Bolea, yeah, that's it. Bolea, yeah. Bolea, thank you, Brandon. Yeah, and I knew that for some reason. I was having a brain fart.
Rough week for us Gen Xers, man. Rough week, between Ozzy, Theo,
Malcolm
Jamal Warner. Yeah.
I sort of met Malcolm Jamal Warner, kind of.
Did you?
I was on the red carpet with him at the Voice Arts Awards in 2015. I was walking the red carpet, and he had just finished, and so I can't remember. William Shatner was being honored that night, and I remember seeing him there. I wasn't on the carpet with him, but I remember seeing him, because when a big celebrity shows up to the red carpet, they like to make a lot of space for them and all that. And so us not so celebrity-ish people, don't get to be with them. But still being there and being nominated is still, a big deal. So I was very happy about that. But so I remember, I think he had just finished, and we were on the red carpet and getting, the photos taken and everything, and that was quite the experience. And then I happened to look over to my left, and I see this, tall, of course, that's not a big step. Most people are taller than me. Tall, strapping, handsome man. Theo Huxtable, Malcolm Jamal Warner, who... he was nominated for something that night, and he won as well. And I can't remember what he won, but he was there. And I remember it was like, oh, fuck. I was like, that's Theo. You know what I mean? And so, yeah. So, didn't really like meet him, but I was like, a foot from him, so I felt the Cosby Show love,
Yeah,
but sad, actually, very young and an accident.
I watched a few... been catching a few old Cosby shows on YouTube. That show's a funny show.
It's a great show. It's a great show. Great show.
So yeah, no, man, just we're at that age, man, where this is going to become kind of our new norm. Like the people we grew up watching. Well, except for Theo, that's just freaky.
It's an accident. I mean, he died. He drowned.
A lot of the adults that we looked up to as kids, or who, whatever. We're at that point in our lives now, really we're, in some aspects we're halfway through, the journey,
Well,
I'd like to double it. I hope I can double it and then some. That'll push me into the 90s, but it just,
Well, and it's no, you're right. And I've said this on my own, away from this show, I've said that, over the next 10 years, and I said this like 3 years ago.
Oh, it's going to be a rough 10 years.
I said this like 3 years ago. I said, over the next 10 years, I said, we're going to lose some bona fide legends. I said,
big names,
because I mean, you know, whether it's Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Harrison Ford, Robert De
Ford,
Niro, Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, Clint Eastwood, you know, whatever. I mean, they're all over 75, you know, and some of
except
them
for
in their
Keith
90s.
Richards. Keith Richards is going to outlive us all.
He is. He's going to live to
Swear to
186.
God.
But it's just crazy, you know. It's just crazy, and you know, whether it's actors, musicians, wrestlers, I mean, it's crazy. So let's talk about Hulk Hogan here for a second. So
yeah, man. I mean, talk about like, I mean, you know, if you were not if you were not a kid at that time, I mean, it's hard to put into words. Now, granted, I wasn't the biggest Hogan fan in the 80s, but I don't deny, I mean, no social media, nothing. And just the impact of pop culture that dude had in that decade was insane.
It was.
And to be a kid, for young kids especially, even the ones who were fans, he was like the first quote unquote real superhero, you could even say.
It's true. It's true.
To kid in the 80s, you know?
Yeah, no, you're right. And before we continue, I will say as well, look, Hulk Hogan in certainly the last 15 years of his life, maybe a bit further in terms of the sex tape and the racist rants and all that. Yes, in the last sort of, you know, half of his life, obviously there was some controversy and some turmoil and things like that. We're not, you know, I'm not, you know, talking about what Hogan and the WWE in terms of his pop culture footprint and impact is not to diminish that. Two things can be true at the same time. You can be legendary and also maybe, you know, have some issues. And so, you know,
everybody's got issues.
Yeah. I just want to say that I don't
leave it at that.
I don't think, you know, us talking about Hulk Hogan, the character, hang on, us talking about Hulk Hogan, the character, is not negating anything that people have issues with. I just want to say that because some people like to say, you know, but he's this and he's that and he's this and he's that. Yes, but
it's not gonna, you know,
it doesn't. It doesn't change. Look, we're talking about
It doesn't
Hulk
change
Hogan.
the memories that we had as kids,
No.
and it doesn't change the moments that I shared with my brother, my cousins, my friends watching all the pay-per-views and stuff.
That's
like
it.
Those are memories that I will forever cherish. And
Right.
I can separate it because of that.
And if it does for you, if you can't separate it, that's fine. And you don't want to watch, then don't watch. You're not paying to be here, right? It's free. So, but I will just say that you know, I need to say that because obviously people seem to think that you can't talk about him, you know, in one way because he did something, you know, like this. And, you know, we're talking about Hulk Hogan. We're not talking about Victor Salva. Okay. So I think we can, you know, nonetheless,
moving on to the positive vibes.
Well, but I want to piggyback off of something you said, because what is really important here is, and again, maybe, you know, without sounding like, you know, a middle-aged guy who's being like, back in our day, but it's true that, you know, some people have said, no, Stone Cold Steve Austin was the greatest of, you know, and this and this and this and this and this. Well, here's what I have to say to that. So, not to take anything away from the Attitude Era and the late 90s and all that is its own thing. And he was amazing. And he was a box office draw and you know, all that. Of course, it was huge. It was huge. But Hulk Hogan, was it Bolea? Bolea, that's it. Bolea. I want to put the other one before that. Nobody had seen anything like this before. And you have to also remember the time that we were in. So it's very similar to when Tony and I talk about Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. And when we talk about the 80s was very much a cultural change in America,
MTV,
will you say.
Yes, Hulk Hogan,
100%.
Freddie. You know, but this was when you have the president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, quoting Freddy Krueger in a speech, you're reaching pop culture status. You know, when you've got guys like Hogan showing up for presidential stuff, that you're reaching, you know, stuff that we had never seen before.
Right, and it's not just the character and the person; it's the era. And so people who are a bit younger have to remember the era of the 80s, whether it's music, whether it's television, whether it's movies, whether, you know, there was a huge cultural shift in pop culture when it came to the 80s and the late 70s into the 80s, that was, of course, the Spielbergs and the whole, it was just a very different, there was a huge entertainment pop cultural shift. It just was like an explosion to the likes that they had never seen before up to that point. And so you have to remember that a lot of this stuff is all about timing and the perfect timing. And the WWE, or the WWF at that time, was regional. It was, cities and different factions factions and things like that. And it wasn't the huge thing that it is now. And to Tony's point, Hulk Hogan comes onto the scene, and, WrestleMania and all that. But he became, again, we hadn't seen anything like it. That's why, he's often referred to as the Babe Ruth of this or whatever, because despite what you think of his personal life, and despite what you might think about, where the WWF was in the 90s, it is true when they say, if it wasn't for that era in the 80s and Hogan coming up, you may not have wrestling today in the way that you have it. That is true.
Not only that, but Austin is my all-time favorite wrestler. He's in my top 5 and he's number 1. But fact is, and if you're a pure wrestling fan and how that period went in, from 96 beyond, if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan doing what he did with the NWO in July of 96 at that pay-per-view event, he doesn't do that, right? If he sticks to the red and gold, Vince McMahon doesn't make the shift in 97 to the Attitude Era. Flat out. That doesn't happen. It was because what WCW was doing at that time. And when Hogan decided to make that run as a heel, and WCW was more in your face, and getting more like raunchier and whatever. In fact, you can kind of start to see the pivot with WWF right around March of 97, especially like when Austin wrestled Bret Hart at WrestleMania. He was kind of like the anti-hero. He wasn't quite getting the pops that eventually he would get, but you were seeing that shift. And then obviously what happened in Montreal in November of 97, a lot of people feel that that's like the kickoff of the Attitude Era, because a few weeks later, Vince drops that like iconic promo in December of 97, like, so long are the days of say your prayers and eat your vitamins. We're now in the Attitude Era so that happens in 97. If Hogan doesn't do that in 96, if they stick to him with the whole superhero red and gold and all this stuff like that, because WWF was still doing the gimmicky shit and they were failing. WCW was whooping the shit in the ratings for about 83 straight weeks against WWF. And if WWF doesn't pivot like that, and if Hogan doesn't do what he did, who knows? We don't know where it eventually would have went to, but there certainly would never have been an Attitude Era. It was because of what WCW was doing, and it's because of what Hogan was doing in WCW is the reason why the WWF had to match it. In fact, DX wasn't even formed, Shawn Michaels and Triple H DX. They didn't come until August of 97. So almost a full year went by before the WWF had their own version of the NWO. So you've got, look, Austin, that's my boy. Like, that is but I don't take away from the fact of the impact that Hogan did and the decision that he made, that Vince had the opportunity to turn that dude heel, because that's where Hogan wanted to go. He before he left the WWF and said he wouldn't run against Vince, he wanted to turn heel. He knew he could turn heel, and the rest is history. He did what he did, and and we got the Attitude Era because of that. So people can't forget that.
And it's and again, I don't mean to belabor the point, but when he was coming up, when he beat the Iron Sheik. And when he was coming up, and of course, WrestleMania 3 and Andre and all that, but that run between 85 to like 89, that middle to late 80s, Hulk Hogan, and also, okay, so there's 2 points I want to make that I think are really, really important that you lost by the time you got to the Attitude Era. And not that it wasn't phenomenal and huge and things were firing on all cylinders. They were, the Monday Night, wars and all that, and it was great. But something that was still in the 80s that eventually, by the time you got to the late 90s, was gone. And that was that in the 80s, the idea that this was real was still very much a thing. Now, it wasn't out of the bag, right? The WWE and Vince McMahon didn't admit that it was sports entertainment and that everything was, predetermined until I don't know when.
Well, no, and you had guys in the 80s, man, and even through the mid-90s, up through the mid-90s, who were really hardcore with that kayfabe stuff. And they would live and breathe that. For those who don't know what kayfabe is, basically, they don't leave the character. It's like, if you break your arm in a match, you're pretending your arm is broken. It's kayfabe, right? It's not really broken, but if they went out in public, they're wearing the cast.
And
you know what I mean?
And there are a lot of people that would do that. But the point I'm making
dedication.
Is it is. But the point I'm making is that yes, a lot of people suspected it. I think the kids suspected it less because you're a child and you buy into it because you're a kid. I think there were some adults that believed that this might be real. There were some adults that also thought, no, this is not real. But the point I'm making is that there was a dichotomy. Now, nobody thinks wrestling's real because there was an admission at some point in the 90s that this is sports entertainment and this is just like going to see Gladiators or, we hear it's a male soap opera and all that kind of stuff. But that wasn't an admission in the 80s. Yes, some of the things were cheesy, and you look at it now and you think, how could anybody believe this? But a lot of kids did, and some grown-ups did as well. And they believed it was real. Now, as the WWF became more sensational and theatrical towards the late 80s, thanks to Hogan, it got harder and harder to keep up with appearances because, costumes got more theatrical, characters got more, theatrical, the wrestling got more theatrical. And it just kind of was like, okay, this is a little like, this can't be real, right? But coming up in the 70s and into the 80s, the early 80s, people thought it was real. They thought these were real matches that were not predetermined. These people were really trying to beat each other. And so there was a magic, there was a mystery, there was a mystique. At the right time when Hogan was coming up, it was like Mike Tyson. He was the Mike Tyson of boxing, of wrestling. And it was kind of like that. It was like, wow, like, you believed. And when he came out, bum, 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 ba-na-na-na, and he's coming out and he's doing this and he's doing this, and you believed it was, he's real. And he's actually going to have a real match where it's not predetermined. It's going to be, and that, you lost that by the time you got to the Attitude Era. That sense of awe and wonder and magic, it was there, but it was different. It was a different kind of thing. It became very much television, very much entertainment, as opposed to sports. And back in the 80s, it felt very much like an event. I mean, you look at Cyndi Lauper and Muhammad Ali, and they're coming in and WrestleMania and Mr. T, and it was like this big thing. And you lost that, I think, when you got to the 90s. And then the last thing I'll say...
Not necessarily. Chris Jericho said it best. It doesn't matter the generation and decade you look at. These men and women today, they're stuntmen. And they have to go out there, perform live, and get it in one take. There's no margin for error. There's no margin for misstep because error. Austin was nearly paralyzed and had his career nearly shortened because of a mishap that Owen Hart pile drived him, and his head hit the canvas and crushed his neck in. That's a misstep.
I agree.
But these guys like these guys like the Hardy Boys who are doing swanton flips off the top of ladders and shit, and onto like tables and shit. Like there's wild. There's no room for error. These guys have got these. Like Jericho said, they're stuntmen and women that have to go out there and do this, and they've got to get it right, because if they get it wrong, I mean, you're talking serious injuries. Death, like what happened to Owen.
I totally agree, but I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that it's not as it's not as risky, or it's diminished. I'm not talking about it from the side of the performers. I'm talking about it from the side of the audience as kids, when, you know, so many people believed it was a undetermined, like, imagine if you watched baseball or football knowing that the outcome was already predetermined, as opposed to watching the Super Bowl really feeling like this is anybody's game. Like, there's a different, in my opinion, there's a different sense of magic and awe and wonder in that mystique of this is an actual sport, you know, in terms of, like, you know, we don't know who's going to win and they don't know who's going to win, and they're actually there, like, really wrestling, like UFC. Like, imagine if you found out that UFC was predetermined. It would lose, you know, and it was just entertainment. It would lose a bit of something, a bit of that real, those stakes. It would lose a bit of that stakes as a viewer to tune in my opinion. And I think that was there in the 80s and in the 90s when you found out it was sports entertainment. That doesn't take away from, look, as you said, these guys are tough as nails. They're stunt performers, they're acrobatics. They put their lives on the line. The shit they do is unbelievable, but it becomes a show. And I think it becomes very much entertainment as opposed to sport. And I think, and that's not to diminish it. I'm not diminishing it. I'm talking about the cultural zeitgeist and perception of sort of that mystique and that allure, that event allure from the audience. Now, I think it's changed over time, where now people have become accustomed to it and used to it, and they found, you know, their ground. But it's very much entertainment in the sense of a show, right? As opposed to sports, with it not being predetermined. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think that there's a mystique that might have been lost in the 80s, that was still there. People believe that this was like a huge Super Bowl event, and it was wild. And Hulk Hogan crossed the threshold of the zeitgeist. He was in the popular culture. And I don't think there's another wrestler that's like that.
McMahon was calling it sports entertainment by WrestleMania 1. He wasn't calling it, that term sports entertainment is actually Linda McMahon is the one who kind of gave Vince the idea for that. When Vince was, you know, because back in the day, like you started to talk about, you know, when his father ran the territory up in the Northeast, and then you had all the other territories, it was kind of like a gentleman's handshake. You don't, you know what I mean? You don't pick from the crop. You don't, you know, go into other people. Vince Jr., bro, was like, fuck that, I'm going everywhere. So he started coining the phrase sports entertainment around 84, 85, just before WrestleMania 1 came out. And so that's, you know, when they went into that direction with that.
But nobody, but I don't think it was out. Like,
no, it wasn't.
No,
I'm telling you, I can send you the videos on it. It was very, when he was doing interviews and describing how that, because they were talking about this stuff in the 80s, and that when Vince would give the interviews and say, yeah, it is predetermined, but it's sports entertainment.
Well, then I'll
send it to you.
You need to send me that, because I don't think, my recollection and memory of being in the 80s was that it was not out. I'm not saying he didn't call it sports entertainment, but I'm saying that my recollection that the holding the magic and the wizard behind the curtain, that this was real, because to your point, right, you know, characters would walk around with a real, you know, they pretend to still be hurt, and King Kong, you know, Bundy and Hogan's ribs and all this kind of stuff. They would do that, and the reasons to do that is to not destroy the illusion. Well, now you don't have to do that. Now it's like, you know, it's not really a thing. I don't think, so he may have been calling it that then, but yeah.
No, he did. And there were several interviews that people were challenging him on the fact that it was a scripted thing. And he was really hammering the home that this was sports entertainment. And it goes back to the mid 80s, because, you know, I mean, people were calling him out for that and saying, and then the whole steroid thing happened in the early 90s and whatnot, and
that's where I think
he almost lost his business even then in the early 90s.
And that's where I think maybe it really, again, I'm not saying that what you're saying is incorrect. My recollection of it is through most of the 80s, there was still an illusion and still a dichotomy and assumption by most, maybe not you, but by most fans, general fans, that this is this real? Is this not real? Some people think it's real. Some people, wrestling's so fake. Wrestling's so fake. No, it's not. Yes, it is. That was still very much an argument in the 80s with kids, whereas now nobody would argue. And by the way, it's not fake. By the way, it's predetermined. But these guys are really kicking their, they're throwing themselves around, right? It really is a real thing. But that thing in the 80s, it's fake, no, it's not, it's fake, no, it's not, I don't think would have been an argument had it been out there in the general populace, right? Like maybe it took a while to spread because it was, it was the 80s, right? And there was no internet, right? And so that's my recollection of it, though. But in terms of Hulk Hogan, I mean, he was an absolute legend, transcended the popular zeitgeist and culture like no wrestler ever has. And lunchboxes and toys and video games and t-shirts and it's just something that I don't think we've ever, at that point, we'd never seen. You said it earlier. He was like a superhero.
Well, for us kids in the 80s, he was the first, especially because when you think about, he had when with a superhero, you always have a great villain. He had a great villain to start, when they were launching WrestleMania 1 with Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
Easily, Piper's in my top 5 favorites of all time. Probably if I were saying best heel, Piper, hands down. Best heel.
Cool.
And Piper was smart though, man. Piper was smart. Here's a fun fact that most people may not know. Piper is the only wrestler to never let Hogan pin him cleanly.
I've heard
that.
I've heard that.
Ever. Except Piper did put him in a sleeper submission. So Piper did get that one. But WrestleMania 1, Hogan pinned Mr. Wonderful. And then any other time Hogan and Piper wrestled each other, it was either a DQ or a count out.
Right.
And then when they both entered WCW, or when Piper came into Hogan was already there, and Hogan was already with NWO. Piper had become baby face at that time.
Right.
And so, and Piper was smart enough to protect his character because he knew the bullshit that Vince was doing with Hogan at the time, the politics behind the scenes and shit like that. And he was like, I ain't having that shit. Yeah. And he's the only wrestler to never let Hogan beat. And the one time Hogan did pin Piper was at the WCW pay-per-view where Hogan hit him with a, whatever it was in his hand, that kayfabe knocked him out.
Right.
Yeah. So,
he,
when you think of that, you think of WrestleMania 1, or you think of him and like you started to say him and Andre, right?
Yeah,
Andre,
huge.
the Giant, right? You have that iconic shot of them at WrestleMania 3 and Andre's
6'8",
looking
Andre's
down.
7'5". Get out, shut up.
You got Andre looking down at him and Hogan's just shaking his head. According to Vince McMahon, the numbers have gone up in front of 500,000 people.
I know. I know. Do you know how
I think it was like 70, but they said 97 or something. I think it was actually like 75.
It was 90.
Something.
I think they said 92. I've heard Andre's
92,
I've heard Andre's weight
10.
flux too. I've heard it. First he was 500, then he was 525, 550, 650, and I've heard 700. And I'm like,
the shitty thing is though, the unfortunate thing about that match is if it just a couple years earlier, if you go back to like the early 80s when Andre and Hogan were fighting each other back, like at Shea State, Andre could move.
Oh, he could move.
He could move.
He was a lot lighter. He was a lot lighter.
And it's just unfortunate that he was at that stage where Hogan really, look, for all the crap we can say Hogan did behind the scenes and not putting people over, he really made Andre look good in that match.
He did.
I mean, he really did. And Andre, you hear all these stories about just how much he was in pain.
Yeah.
And it's just like, bro, for real?
Yeah.
No,
it was electric. It was electric. And
when he slammed him, like that was like, I mean, I remember as a kid, we're watching that, like all of us were like jumping up and down on the couch, when he slams him.
And the crazy thing is, because there was no internet, because it was a much simpler world, right? Us kids and probably most adults, not all, but most probably, didn't realize, because of the magic, because of the aura, because I'll speak for myself, because I still thought it was real, you know, and you know, a lot of people did. You know, you're like, oh my God, and you don't realize that no, he's actually slammed Andre a couple of times before in the past.
Yeah,
like 10 years ago.
When Andre had a fro.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's part of the magic. That's part of and if that happened, you couldn't get away with that today, because everybody would be like, oh no, because it's right here at my fingertips on YouTube. You'd be able to know that this happened before. But back in the 80s, in 87 at WrestleMania 3, nobody knew that this wasn't the first time that Hogan had picked up Andre, because they sold it so well, right? You know what I mean? And because
I forgot the word. There was the wording that they used that Andre hadn't, like, it made it sound like he had never lost, but in fact, I think he did lose, like early years and stuff like that. But like they were, I'm sorry, Linda was really, like, a lot of people don't give Linda McMahon the credit where credit is due. She was the brains behind a lot of the you know, what was going on behind the scenes. Right. Very smart with, you know, how to market, you know, the matches and the wording and all this stuff that. And I can't remember the verbiage that they used, but they made it seem like when they built up that Andre match with Hogan, they made it seem like Andre had never lost. But like, to your point, you can go back and look at earlier matches in the 70s. Andre had lost. You know? It happened, you know? So, but we didn't have access to that shit.
Well, you didn't know, right? So there was that illusion.
Right? Unless you lived in the area, right? You didn't know.
No, you didn't know at all.
If you lived in the area and you just happened to watch it.
Yeah, if you were there,
you would know.
Right? But then you'd know. But no, you didn't. And most people didn't know. And he picked him up. And of course, now it seems so simple compared to what wrestlers are doing today.
Still iconic.
But of course it is. Yeah. Oh, and look, it doesn't matter if Andre helped him or not. It doesn't matter. Like, you know, you look at Goldberg, right? With all the people he, you know, lifted up and jackhammered, like, you know, the Big Show. And it doesn't matter if, yes, the Big Show helped him because he put his... He's still a 450, 500-pound dude, you know, and he's still lifting him up and turning him this way.
Try to pick up a human.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And so it was electric. It was a simpler time. The wrestling was simpler. And Hogan was, despite what you think of the man, he is, as they say, he is the Babe Ruth of the of wrestling. And not because but there's a distinction.
He's not even in my top 5, and I agree with that.
Right.
Like, I can't not acknowledge what he
but
did.
It's not because he was the greatest wrestler. It's not because he had the best moves. It's not because he was oh my God, he was bouncing around the ring like, you know, the Rockers and, you know, Jannetty and Shawn Michaels. No, it had nothing to do with that. It's because of his charisma, his size, and the right time at the right place to connect. Cocaine, but yes, we can't forget that.
Lots of cocaine,
but to connect, right time, his size, his charisma, and his ability among all the other wrestlers to cross the threshold. You hear me talk about this when I talk about horror movies and Art the Clown, all this kind of stuff. Being able to cross the threshold of your own space into the pop culture zeitgeist, where everybody knows who you are, whether they've seen you wrestle or not. Everybody knows who Darth Vader is, whether you've laid eyes on a Star Wars movie or not. That is the level we're talking about.
Dude, I swear to God, this is literally almost verbatim what I just said to Christina this afternoon. There are names you can mention. Michael Jordan, you know who that is.
Yeah.
Babe Ruth, you know who that is.
Elvis.
Hulk Hogan. Yeah. Elvis, Hulk Hogan. You know, his name transcended, Hogan's name transcended the sport that he was in.
Yes.
And not many people reach that. I mean, Austin did for sure. But even saying that, you could go to places in the world and say Stone Cold Steve Austin, and you might get a what?
Yep.
You say Hulk Hogan, they're going to know who you're talking about.
You would have to put Stone Cold in front of it. You couldn't just say Steve Austin.
Steve Austin, right. You have to put the Stone Cold for people to know what you're talking about.
Where if you just say Hulk Hogan, I mean, there wasn't a kid around who didn't know, whether it's Canada, the U. I mean, obviously there's certain countries in the world that obviously probably wouldn't. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, you know, everybody knew who he was. And it wasn't just because of wrestling. He was on lunchboxes and toys and video games, and he was in commercials, and he was he had crossed the threshold.
Do you remember the little
the toys?
The toys where they couldn't move their arms. They like this.
Yes.
I had to try to wrestle with them and shit.
And Andre the Giant was the same size as Hogan. And that pissed me off. It pissed me off because they were like eye to
I had
eye.
the whole collection. I had that whole collection. Yeah.
Yeah, me
God.
too. Me too.
With
And
the little ring and stuff, and like they were too big for the ring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not kidding you. Like
yes,
put
they
two
were.
of them in there, and there's like nowhere to move them. And
There
shit.
wasn't, and they're like their thighs were like at like the third rope, like the ropes were too short, and but no, I mean it was.
Well, and of course, being that we obviously do talk about movies, we can't not talk about Rocky 3.
I mean that's
Thunder
what
Lips.
Thunder Lips, Rocky 3, 1982. That's what sort of that could have been the catalyst that put him on the trajectory, because nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew who this guy was at all.
No, and in fact, that's when he was working for Vince Sr. and Vince Sr. didn't want him to do it. And I think Vince Sr. let him go, and it was Vince Jr. who brought him back, realizing the popularity of being in Rocky 3.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, it was.
And then Stallone, you ever hear Stallone talk about some of the like behind the scenes and filming and how he got hurt?
Yeah.
Taking a few of those slams.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was, again, he was the greatest of all time. Not the greatest wrestler of all time, but in terms of that star power, that face, that pop culture zeitgeist, that legendary presence, the face of wrestling. I'm not saying he was a terrible wrestler, but he came from a different era. He came from the 70s.
He wasn't terrible.
From the 70s.
He was very limited, and it became, like
more so as he got older.
Yeah, and even in the late 80s, it became predictable. Yeah. Like you knew what was going to happen in his matches. It would be kind of a back and forth, and then the bad guy would get the upper hand, and then just before he gets the pin, Hogan starts to Hulk up and goes into the routine that we've all seen 1,000 times over, and then hits him with the big boot, drops a leg drop, 1, 2, 3, we're going home. I mean, that's what I mean by he was limited in that regard.
Oh, he was.
Where he just didn't, there was nothing beyond that. Even when he was with NWO, same thing. It was the same moves, but I take nothing away from it.
No. And, a lot of big men were. I mean, look, there are exceptions to the rule, like Brock Lesnar, who's just an exceptional athlete.
Oh my, that dude is just freaking a freak of nature.
He's a freak of nature. But when you look at the era that Hogan came up in the 70s. He was a big guy. There's not too many. There's a few now, especially with the improvement of medicine and training and whatever else they're on and all that kind of stuff, of course. But when he's coming up, athletes like hockey players, football players, baseball, players, basketball players don't hold a candle to the athleticism of their modern day counterparts, right? I mean, like you take hockey. Hockey is faster. The athletes are stronger and better today than they've ever been before because it's today, And so, obviously the eras are specific, but Hogan came up as the 6 foot, whatever he was, 5 or 6. I know they say he's 6'8". He wasn't 6'8", but because they always bill higher, and Andre wasn't 7'4" or 7'5". Andre was about, I think he was about 7 foot, maybe 6'11", 7 foot. You put boots on him when he's walking through an airport, he's probably like 7'2". But anybody who thinks he's actually 7'4", he's not. He was not. That's wrestling, and WWE did that with everybody. They notch because that's part of the show. It's gladiators. It's mythic. It's godlike. And when you're sitting in your seat, you can't tell if he's 6'2" or 6'5". You know what I mean? And it's all part of the show. You know what I mean? Hogan was never 6'8". He might have been 6'6", at one point, and then the surgeries and things like that. He's now 6'3", or not. Rest in peace, but was 6'3", 6'4". But I digress. The point I'm making is that, he was a big guy. He was a big dude. And there aren't too many big men, 6'6", 300 pounds that move around the ring like it's nobody's business. And and wrestling was different then. Wrestling in the 70s and the early 80s was all about just, doing the grip of strength, right? Where the guys would like lock hands and they'd be there for like 10 minutes. It seemed like, that's like half your match. You don't see guys doing that anymore because for modern audiences, it's boring. You know what I mean? mean? But back in the day, you'd see that for 10 minutes. And because you thought it was real, it was like, oh my God, who's gonna, oh my God, oh look at this, You were invested. Now, because you know it's not real, it's like, just get on with it, for God's sakes. I know you're faking this fucking thing. And, but so you had that. You had guys that would just, the leg drop in the early 80s would be something like some wild flip off the rope. And today, like, seeing that leg drop, it was, oh my God, the leg drop. Wrestling has changed. Wrestlers are more athletic. They're more dynamic. They just move so better. The training is better. The eating is better. The medication is better. And I don't mean roids, although that's, but all that stuff is so much better today. Where back then, they were limited. It felt more like real wrestling almost. Like there was a little bit of more of that real wrestling where they'd lie on the mat for what seemed like 10 minutes in like a leg lock. You know what I mean?
No,
and you'd see more of that back then, whereas now,
well,
of course,
and that's, I will say back then, we may not have had like what they have today. And now I don't watch most of the stuff today, but you know what?
No, I haven't seen wrestling in years.
Back then you had guys like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart who were really good technical wrestlers.
Yes.
And very much they laid the foundation for really where it is today, for making it more of an art form, more technical moves rather than the basic simplistic moves and whatnot. That's why, if I were to like list my top 5, it would be Austin at 1, Savage at 2, Taker 3, Piper 4, and Bret it would be in my 5 spots, simply for the fact that I respect what Bret's capability was in the ring. You know what I mean? I wish, again, you can point out all the negatives about Hogan. The one thing that I wish Hogan did a little bit more of is like, give a match to Bret. They could have had something. They could have had a run together. But Hogan felt Bret wasn't like that at that level. And, we can say what we want about the new generation era in the 90s there before the Attitude Era. Bret did what he could to keep that company going, and he did. He did. When he did, whether you like that period in wrestling or not, he kept it going. Him and Shawn Michaels, before the whole nonsense that happened in your homeland there, Canada, the Montreal screw job. Him and Michaels had legendary matches. Bret had a legendary match with Austin at WrestleMania. It just would have been cool, because I think of other moments, like, for example, try being a Macho Man fan growing up in the 80s. You were just full with disappointment constantly. Like, for real. No, for real. Like, WrestleMania 2, he beats George the Animal Steel. Okay, cool. WrestleMania 3, I can't hate on the match against him and Steamboat because it's considered one of the greatest matches of all time, which it is. When wrestlers, talk about like their top match of all time, it is hands down Steamboat versus Savage. Except being a Savage fan, he doesn't come out on top at the end. Steamboat does. Yeah. But then when he wins the title at 4 with Elizabeth in the ring, who's there? Freaking Hogan. I'm just like, really, bro? You gotta be in this ring right now with Savage and having his moments. You know what I mean? Like, dude, like, what are you doing? That's why I always stand by. I remember when me and my brother and my cousins and friends, we watched WrestleMania 5, and I called it before it happened. I said, Hogan's going to win. No. Hogan's going to win. I really wished that Hogan had, whether it was a DQ, whatever it was, I wish Hogan, because Hogan was so over at that point. He didn't need the title. He fell into that category that Austin fell into. By the time Austin hit his peak popularity, Austin didn't need to have the title because he was so fucking over. Yeah. You know what I mean? Hogan was so over at that point that he didn't need the belt. I think it could have done Savage a little bit more, because when you look at Savage after WrestleMania 5 and that whole match between him and Hogan, he wrestles. I mean, look, I'm not taking anything away from Dusty Rhodes, but it's Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire versus him and Sensational Macho Man and Sensational Sherry.
Scary Sherry?
And, here's the thing about that. I didn't like her with Randy Savage. I loved her with Shawn Michaels. And here's a missed opportunity. Like, the creative writing room, right, in the 80s. If you knew that you were going to have Macho Man win the King of the Ring and you were going to call him King Savage, I understand the beef him and Elizabeth had, but you don't think you could have maybe kept it going a little bit longer? Queen Elizabeth, you know what I mean? Like, talk about a huge missed opportunity to play off of that when he became, the whole King Savage. But then after that WrestleMania against Dusty Rhodes, which he lost, he loses the next WrestleMania to the fucking Warrior in the career-ending match. And thank God for Ric Flair gave Savage a moment. That's
I don't remember any of this. I'm amazed that you remember all this. This is wild.
80s and 90s and early 2000s wrestling, bro. I could have a whole channel.
I remember none of this.
Yeah, WrestleMania 7, he had the career ending. That's when Elizabeth came back and beat up Sherry and threw her out of the ring, and they had that whole moment, and people were crying and finding out years later that they were staged actors, but whatever. It was, it was cute at the moment. But yeah, so Savage has that career-ending match against Warrior, only to come back the following year, and like I was starting to say with Ric Flair puts Savage over, and Savage gets the belt clean. It's just him and Elizabeth. So I wish Hogan was a little bit more like that, like how Ric Flair was. Ric Flair was willing to do things like that. Piper was willing to do things like that. Piper had that great, the only time he never won the championship, but he had the Intercontinental title and wrestled Bret Hart. And I think that might be the first time when Bret Hart won the IC title, when the Intercontinental title meant something back in. Now it doesn't mean shit. But back in the day when me and Dave were kids, that WWF title and the Intercontinental, that meant something. That was like, well,
and there were only 3 titles. There was
that was it. Now there's like 100.
I know. There was the freaking keep up. The World Championship, the Intercontinental belt, and the tag team.
Yeah, so that's my my only issue with Hogan as a kid growing up. It was just like so predictable. Like, it's just like, really, dude? Like, you couldn't give that to Savage at WrestleMania 5, because I often wonder if Hogan had done that for him, maybe that would have sent Savage on a little bit of a different trajectory. I'm not saying his trajectory was bad, but just the matchups that Vince was putting him up against. Like, here's the thing. Savage is he's main eventing 4, he's main eventing 5, and then he's basically dropping to a mid card after that, except for WrestleMania 8 against Flair, where I think that was the double main event. I think Hogan had the first one, and that might have been against Sid Vicious, if I'm not mistaken. Psycho Sid. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I don't remember any of this. I think that was WrestleMania 8, was because Hogan fought Slaughter at WrestleMania 7. That was during the whole Iraq War thing. That was like the peak of Iraq.
Yep.
Remember?
I remember that.
Yeah, and Sergeant Slaughter got on the whole freaking Iraq thing. Yeah, so I think 8 was the double main event, and Flair and Savage had that. But yeah, it's like, dude, you didn't need the title then, And I think that would have furthered, because to your point of what you said, which is so true, not many of the guys then in the 80s broke past that barrier like Hogan did.
No, nobody.
And that would have done. This is why the Attitude Era is so revered, because every guy in that locker room was in it to push each other. That's why The Rock was right there as equals with Austin, right? And Taker and Kane and Shawn Michaels and Triple H. These. I mean, you got an entire Hall of Fame roster. And that's because nobody in that locker room was about themselves. They were about pushing the product and the brand and whatnot. Whereas Hogan, if he had just seen it that way, right? If he had just, maybe said, Randy, I'm going to put you over and you win at 5, because that's going to help the business. Instead,
well, you hear a lot of the ways he
you get the traditional. Hogan, and really what pissed me off about his match at 5 is that, Savage's move was the elbow drop,
Right. Yep.
Yes. And he gives him like 5 of them, and I'm maybe not 5, but he gave him several, and Hogan kicks out of it. So you're basically diminishing Savage's finishing move, and that Hogan's after several times that he just gives it to Hogan, and Hogan's
now Savage would have known that though. Randy Savage would have.
Well, that's what I mean, and I give Savage credit. You know what I mean? That he didn't fight against it or whatever, and
he should have been like, I'm not going out there. Fuck that.
That's where Piper. I wish Piper had sat down with Savage and gave him some advice and say, "Listen, brother, don't be doing that shit, man. Like, protect your character." I ain't
going out there. I'm telling you right now, I'm fucking right. No, I'm amazed at how much obviously I remember things, but the detail for which you remember this is pretty cool. But no, look, I don't disagree with anything you've said. And in regards to some of the things, I haven't heard a lot, but I have heard Jesse Ventura talk about Hulk Hogan and others, talk about him and how he was, and and things. And yes, of course, that's unfortunate. And of course, he shouldn't have been that way. And but at the end of the day, he is the greatest superstar in terms of wrestling that the business has ever seen. There has never been another wrestler to reach the same heights. That doesn't mean there's never been another wrestler to be a star and be a household name like Stone Cold Steve, and certainly The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, but that's largely from his movie career now. Hogan did do movies, but he didn't have a flourishing movie career. I mean, he did, Suburban Commando, The Nanny, No Holds Barred. He had Thunder in Paradise, that TV show. I mean, he did a few little things, but he didn't, go off and become this huge movie star like The Rock has. So I would argue that The Rock, his star power is really from his movie career now, more so than it is wrestling career, although that's where it began.
Well, his star power, as far as just him, as far as being a star, absolutely. But as far as that period,
he was huge
in the WWE. He was just as he was right there with Austin.
Oh, you know what I mean?
Like they were. They
100%.
were yin and yang. They were, I mean, they just.
Well, they headlined what, 3 WrestleManias?
3 of them. Yeah,
like
and they headlined 3. Austin 2-1 over Rock. But it was just the attitudes that they had. You know what I mean? No one was really in it for themselves. They were in it for the brand, and you just didn't have that that mentality in the 80s. Look, I get it. Some people will argue and say, well, the reason why they wanted to set Hogan up for 6 with Warrior because they wanted to put the belt on Warrior. I get that. You still could have done that. I'm not saying you can't do that, but just if you think about that moment in 5, what it would have meant for Savage's career and just pushing him even further along to help the business out as a whole. Doesn't mean that in the months ahead, whether it was at SummerSlam or whatever, you have Savage drop the title to Hogan so that you begin that run of setting up Ultimate Warrior versus Hogan at WrestleMania 6. I just, Hogan was just, and look, it's not just Hogan's fault either. Vince obviously plays a huge factor in it because Vince ultimately decides who he's going to put the belt on. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean,
at that time, Hogan was still a huge draw.
And exactly, but I just feel like he was so huge, he didn't need the freaking belt.
Oh no,
you know what I mean?
You're bang on. You're absolutely bang on. But yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable, again, for younger viewers who weren't there, and I understand that, and I say this too on other shows. I say things are relative, right? If you're 22 years old right now, Austin is not your guy. Your guy might be John Cena, or your guy might be somebody else. Came after, and it's difficult when you aren't there at the beginning to understand why us old guys, you're not old, but, kind of talk about it in the way we do. But when there is nothing before it, the first person who transcends it is often never because, and I saw an interview with Triple H, actually, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, not too long ago, maybe it was just the other day, I can't remember, where he was asked a question. He said, do you think we will ever see another wrestler like Hulk Hogan and the impact that Hogan had on the WWE, then, but just pro wrestling as a whole? And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, no. And he said, it's not that you won't see superstars again. Of course, you're going to continue to see stars and charismatic people and all that. But he's saying, but it's because it was the inception. It was the beginning.
It was the birth of it. And we live in a totally different time now.
Exactly. And the birth of something,
it's just different,
It's just different. The birth of something, that first person on the scene who again, it's not just about, it's transcending it. It's transcending it into the popular culture where your grandma knows his name.
Yeah.
That's a different level. That's a level that, most wrestlers would love to achieve.
It's true, because my grandparents didn't watch wrestling, but they knew the name.
Of course.
Right? They knew the name. You say Hulk Hogan, like, oh, that wrestler.
Of course. You say Freddy Krueger, they know. I mean, it's a very, and again, the 80s, the era of the 80s allowed for that because pop culture and entertainment as a whole was in a huge transitional period. And so, you know, it was a very big era that things were moving and things were happening and things were becoming, you know, it was just a very different time.
MTV played a huge part in that connection with WWF at that time, because that was also the birth. Like MTV was still relatively new, so the two of them just kind of worked hand in hand together, and you had this whole thing go. That's what I love about the '80s, man. And if you missed it, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Like, because it just was such a fun time, because you had all this. You know, you can talk about. I mean, all of it kind of just interjected with each other. Like, you could watch Nightmare on Elm Street, you could watch MTV, you could watch wrestling, and like we were all watching it. We were all, you know, being inundated with this new pop culture phenomenon that was happening, and it just all kind of married with each other in an indirect way.
It's true. And when you were there at the birth of something, I mean, obviously Star Wars came out 2 years before you and I were born.
Right? Star Wars. They didn't even mention that shit.
But the point is, those who were there, who saw it in the theater, it's not that you can make an argument. You can make an argument that there have been many movies, science fiction, fantasy movies, maybe, that have come after Star Wars that maybe are better, or this, or whatever the case is. But at that time, in 1977, nobody had seen anything like it. And when nobody sees anything, it's like, regardless of what your thoughts are on the first Avatar film, maybe you don't like it, maybe you hate it, it's Ferngully in space, you're entitled to think that. But the reason it became the cultural juggernaut it was, and I know it doesn't, and people say it doesn't have a pop culture, you know, footprint, I get all that. But when we taught, nobody had seen anything like it in terms of the visual effects. The technology that the first Avatar was created with ceased to exist before Avatar was made. Same with Avatar: The Way of Water. James Cameron's not just a filmmaker, he's an innovator. And so, you know, when something is, there's reasons why that these event films or these event things that come along, when it's the first in something and you've never seen anything like it, it hits differently. And Star Wars was like, nobody had seen effects like that ever. Nobody had seen anything like that. There was nothing in the world that looked like that. Literally nothing. Zilch. Zero. Nada. It ceased to exist, and then one day it existed. And it was like, what the hell is this? And when it came to wrestling and what is this wrestling? And now it's becoming this countrywide thing. And oh my God, what is this? This is so interesting. This is like these big guys in the ring and they're beating the crap out of each other. And Cyndi Lauper and Muhammad Ali and Mr. T. And this is amazing. What the hell is this? And this one guy, what you gonna do? And it's like, this is who, we had never seen anything like it before. Yes, did Hogan's, borrow from certain other wrestlers and sure, of course. But still, nobody had seen anything like it before. And when you have the right mix of charisma and the right mix of connection and luck and at the right place at the right time and this and all that kind of stuff, it's just, so anyway, the point I'm making is Triple H said that, no, we will never see that again because wrestling won't transcend again in the same ways. It's already
so different now.
It's so different. And wrestling is now, he didn't say this, but I know this is what he meant. Wrestling is now where it is. It's comfortable where it is. That doesn't mean it won't continue to grow with technology, but he says it's already had its transcend, right? Like it's already transcended. And Hogan was a big reason. Elvis, the same way. Whether you like Elvis or hate Elvis, it doesn't matter. Nobody had seen anything like it. The Beatles, nobody had seen anything like it. It was phenom. It was
not only that, but
unbelievable.
Not only that, but what they did in the 80s too is they created moments. I'm thinking about another big moment as a kid watching Saturday Night Main Event, which was one of the shows that WWF did back in the day. And it's the one where Savage is, he's getting, manhandled by Honky Tonk. And again, this is what it was like being a Savage fan, man. You're just watching your dude just get manhandled all the time. But he's getting manhandled by freaking Honky Tonk and the Hart Foundation, and Elizabeth goes and she gets Hogan, and Hogan comes out, and I just remember him. He's looking around the crowd, and then he turns to the ring and he's like, he starts doing, and he starts hulking up, and he goes and saves Savage, and you have this huge, and that's when they formed, the Mega Powers and whatnot. And, so you had moments like that, growing up as a kid to appreciate and watch. And now it's different now.
It's different.
You know what I mean? It's not saying that they don't make moments like that anymore.
No. But the novelty's worn off.
The novelty, it's not only worn off, but it's just different.
It's different, right?
You think of I remember as kids, we were so heartbroken when this happened because you didn't want to see the Rockers break up. But that moment on Brutus the Barber Beefcake's
Marty Jannetty.
Yeah, and Shawn Michaels super kicks him through the glass. That was a huge thing that we were all talking about. I can't believe he did that. We don't talk like that anymore about it, and they're not creating those kind of iconic moments because, like you said, it's different. It's not like it was back then when this was all new things that these guys were trying out and creating these moments.
Well, and a lot of the times, maybe wrestling has changed. Obviously it has, but maybe, a lot of the times how you become a huge star isn't being a great wrestler. It's being a larger than life personality and presence. And maybe too many guys are focused on being great wrestlers and not focused more on being, showmen and being, and obviously there's a talent, there's a natural, not everybody is charismatic. Not everybody has that, the gift of the Rock, behind, a microphone. I get that. But that's what it's about. And it's showmanship. It's theater. It's not that there aren't real stakes in terms of injuries and the shit that they do, of course, but it is theater. That's what it is. And, so you have to, these guys are larger than life. They're, and sometimes literally, right? And maybe sometimes, I haven't watched it in years, 25 years, but, maybe now some of it's not as, exciting. I don't know. Modern fans can tell us, but certainly, the first of something is always going to hit different because it's the first. It's the first. It's like the first installment of your favorite franchise. It always hits differently. Because it's the first, because you've never seen it before. And the longer you go on, like most things, novelty wears off and it's old and it's been here, done that. But the 80s, Tony's right.
Well, I think they do it still for the kids today. Again, we're older now. I stopped watching wrestling pretty much right after Austin retired. That was kind of the end of it for me. Yeah. I hung around a little bit. He sort of came back as the GM after his last match with Rock, but started to kind of catch on to the fact I don't think he's wrestling anymore.
Right.
It just I know he had that little thing with Bischoff, but it just was I don't know, and then like you said, there was the magic of it that what we experienced as kids in the 80s and the 90s and the whole Attitude Era run. It just kind of okay, it was a fun ride, and I had a blast with it. Dude, I still, to this day, hit on YouTube and I'll watch the old matches. WWE started a new channel called The Vault, and they've got all these great old matches on there. And all these different moments that have happened over the years in wrestling. And then, of course, Tubi, I think it's Tubi and Peacock. They have great documentaries,
Right.
So I'm always looking out for those, especially anything that involves 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000 run of wrestling. But, it's certainly generational, and this generation now has theirs, they're creating their moments. And I'm sure there'll be two dudes, 40 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever, talking on a YouTube channel, talking about wrestlers of today and the moments that are being created today.
Yeah.
But like you said, which is really important, we were there to watch the birth of all this happen, which, is was cool as hell.
It is, and it's like in sports, right? But you can't. It's difficult to compare eras. So many people want to say so and so is better than.
No, they all have their special place.
But it's like Wayne Gretzky, right? Greatest hockey player of all time. People go, no, he's not. He sucks. Look, folks. You can't compare the '80s to now. Okay, that's very, very different. And but it's you can't compare 80s basketball players to today. Today's basketball players would steamroll the 80s basketball players, just as 80s basketball players would steamroll 60s basketball players. I mean, you know, people get stronger, athletes get better, like I've been saying, and so it's to compare eras is sort of just
nonsense.
It's nonsense. It's a losing battle. You have to
people in the chat room.
Its parent.
Austin did return, I forgot, at WrestleMania 30 to fight Kevin. That was the last time I watched wrestling. When I saw him, he made a brief comeback. Yeah,
I did see that. That's what I did see that.
That's the only match I watched.
Well, yeah, and you tuned in because it was Stone Cold.
It was Stone Cold, and that was it.
Had it been Owens against Billy Bob
and
Boogaboo.
Honestly, I had no clue what he was going to do. He had zero expectations.
No, he did all right. He did all right for an old guy.
He did good. You know, he doesn't need to do anything else. You know, he's done enough. But yeah, that's funny that I keep forgetting about that. That's the first and only time that I've watched any modern wrestling in the recent years was that one WrestleMania match.
Yeah.
So
unbelievable. Hulk Hogan, the immortal Hulk Hogan, dead at 71, 1953.
That's weird just to hear you say that.
It is. It is. And it's, but, you know, for people who might be a bit younger and maybe confused and think it's not a big deal, again, it's not that he was the greatest wrestler. It's not that he was, you know, yes, obviously his later life and obviously things have come out, sure. But there was a time because it was the 80s, because of the era, just like Freddy Krueger, just like Jason Voorhees, just like Michael Jordan, just like Wayne Gretzky, you know, Hulk Hogan crossed the threshold of his own sport, his own sort of category that he was in, into the popular culture. He became a superstar on lunchboxes and cartoon. He had his own fucking cartoon. He had a cartoon, and and movies and games and magazines. He was the first wrestler.
His prayers and his vitamins.
He was the first wrestler, and I stand to be corrected. But he was the first wrestler, and I believe the only wrestler who's ever appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And
you might be right.
And that should show you right there.
I remember I had that Sports Illustrated with him on the cover.
That's how
I think most of us kids had that. Yeah.
And that's how big he was. And we've never seen anything like it. Not Stone Cold, not The Rock with when he was wrestling. Obviously he's this huge, you know, movie star now, but in terms of wrestling, you know,
as
back
Ted Turner would call it, wrestling.
Back in the 80s, I mean, he was just as big as Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky. Just as big. And he was a fucking wrestler in a sport, quote unquote, that's predetermined. I mean, it was just, it's not because he was as great as an athlete as Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky, not even close.
He was an athlete in his own right.
It was his, yes, but I mean, it was his personality. It was his charisma. He was larger than life. He was a superhero. He was a superhero, you know, and so it's just like, wow, Hulk Hogan died. Wow. That's, you know, it hits you. It's like, Jesus, you know?
So many cool memories. Like I said, I could sit here for hours and rehash all of them, man. It's just like a memory bank of just things just all of a sudden started when he passed. I was like, shit. Like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan. He's not even in my top 5 of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And that's not a disrespect to him. And if you're a fan of Hogan, like I had, you know, we all had our favorites, and you know, like for me, it comes down to the memories that I got to share watching the matches with my brother, my cousins, and my friends, all the pay-per-view events and the Saturday night main events or the Saturday morning superstars. You know, that was another big show that we all watched as kids. Actually, we would watch it kind of simultaneously with Saturday morning cartoons because they would, I think Saturday Superstars in our time zone came on at 11 a.m.
I remember.
You know, so, I mean, just a lot of cool memories that, you know, like you said at the beginning of the show, I know people have their feelings about him, and that's cool. Like, I respect, you know, whatever your, you know, opinions are about the dude and, you know, the stuff that came out later. But I'll say this, and I'm not trying to get all religious and whatever and whatnot. If, you know, whether you believe in God or not believe in God, that's your own business. He's in his belief in what he believes. He's on his judgment, and he's being judged for all his things now. And that's pretty much where it should be left. And that's it. You know, I mean, it's just, I'm not gonna like you. I'm not gonna apologize for the memories that I had growing up as a kid and what we got to experience.
Nor should you.
All of a sudden, I'm gonna just forget about that crap and be like, okay, yeah, no, you're right. I'm just gonna no, dude,
that's it.
No way.
That's it.
So, let's get to some Q&A because I do got to get going here.
For sure. Q&A, movie chat and more, part 2, £5. Thank you. Says, I never...
Man, that's a name I haven't heard in a minute.
There you go. I was never a Hulkamaniac, but it's true wrestling wouldn't be the global juggernaut it is today without him. He truly is an icon. Rest in peace, brother. Follows up with another £2 and says, HBK was very real in the late 90s. He was.
Yeah. Hey, fun fact about HBK and his theme song. Do you know who the woman is screaming at the beginning of the song saying, "Oh, Sharon"? That's Sensational Sherry.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, he never changed his theme. Unlike a lot of these other dudes, like Austin, I hated when Austin, except for the Disturbed. Austin's Disturbed Glass Shattered or Shattered Glass, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I might be reversing the name there. I love working out to that song. That just gets me fucking going.
Yep.
But they did a version of Austin's theme when they made the biggest mistake and turned him heel. It was kind of an up-tempo version of his a theme. It just sucked. But Shawn Michaels always, from the time he became the Heartbreak Kid and that theme that they create, he stuck with that. He never changed it. He rode that one all the way out. And that's Sherry at the beginning of his theme song.
I didn't know that. Fascinating. Yeah. I did not know that. Juan Rivera sends in $5, says, grew up a Warrior fan. I respected Hogan. They gave me, in my opinion, the greatest match ever. Title versus title.
I'm not laughing at that.
That's okay. Babyface versus babyface at WrestleMania 6. Forever grateful. Rest in peace. Thank you, Juan. Appreciate that.
Boy, did we not understand as kids what Warrior was talking about until we got older and you're like, what?
Oh,
his promos, man, would be like, "Oh, the Warriors of the Netherlands and beyond the universe," and you're like, dude?
Wasn't there a promo he cut that went on way too long for 15 minutes or something?
He just is I don't know. He's just going on about the parallel universes out there and shit. What the hell? Sure. But as kids, you thought it was cool as hell until you get to it as an adult, and you're like, what?
Yeah, you did. You did. Edward Nito, my Godzilla brother from another mother, been a member for 23 months, sends in a member chat and says, I still can't believe he's gone. My brother and I spent so much time together watching wrestling, horror, and sci-fi movies. Yeah, it's hard to believe he's gone.
Yeah, they kind of, wrestling is like the redheaded stepchild cousin to horror fans. It really is, though. I mean, you're hard-pressed to not find...
Hey, there was a time you would never admit you were a wrestling fan.
Are you kidding me? We didn't care as kids.
Our house was like... But I meant in a general sense, there were a lot of people that were afraid to admit that because of the how some fans were looked down upon.
Oh, I don't know. It wasn't like that where we were. In fact, I remember especially when the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars were happening, dude, you had girls, man, because we were in high school at the time, especially that 96, 97 run. Yeah. Girls wearing NWO t-shirts and shit. And it was you knew holy fuck, this thing, had really come a long way. But no one, in fact, I told you, man, we used to have, especially during the Monday Night Wars, my brother had it set up to where there was 2 televisions in our living room, and we'd have WWF, WCW, and just living room packed with kids. And
Did you guys wrestle each other on mattresses?
Oh, yeah, and then he'd
jumping off the end of a couch.
His finishing move was to start crying to get me in trouble. that was I was like, that's my brother's finishing move. If I did something to hurt him, quote unquote, hurt him, he would start crying. I'm like, you son of a bitch.
That's so funny. I remember leaping off the arm of the couch as if it's the top rope. And
I got something for you.
Leaping off and it's so fun.
Okay, so I have to send you a photo of my house. It's only a 1-story house. It's not a big house. So but at the time, when you're 12, 13 years old, it's big.
Right.
So we had mattresses in the backyard that we stacked.
Right.
Bro, I was doing jackass shit before jackass shit was even popular.
Right.
Dude, I was doing jumps off the roof, doing flips onto the fucking mattresses, onto my friends when we would wrestle each other. We were doing
hardcore matches right there, Tony.
Well, I'm thinking about it now as an adult. I'm like, I am a complete fool because that could have gone sideways real quick. You know what
Right.
I mean? But like, and again, like I'll send you a photo of my house where I grew up at. It's not, but for 12 and 13, it was big, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, so we did that crazy nonsense. But yeah, no, like what I was starting to say with horror fans and it's very hard to not find a horror fan who was also a wrestling fan. So like the two, just like I said, they just went together. That's what made the 80s so great. You know what I mean? Because you had all these new movies in the slasher genre, and then you had WWF as well too. And it was just like such a fun time, you know, to be alive and to be a kid, you know, that with all this, you know, all this new material that was coming our way every year, every week, you know?
Yep. I remember taping it too. I remember.
Oh yeah,
and not
absolutely,
and not because I was going to miss it. I just would put in a VHS tape and tape it, and so I could watch it back and watch it over and over again. And I remember watching, Hogan and this has got to be like 88, 89, 90, somewhere in there. I mean, it was larger than life. I mean, it was crazy.
I have still on my VHS tape when it aired live. Okay, when this aired live for the first time. It's the only thing I think I have from wrestling on VHS. It was a Monday Night Raw, and it was when they had merged with WCW and ECW, and it was this. It to me, I still think it's the loudest pop ever in wrestling, but it can be debated. And it's when Austin came in to save Team WWF, and Jim Ross is on the mic. I mean, he's going Stone Cold, and it's the audience reaction when the audience is there's this anticipation happening of you know he's coming, and you know he's like the camera keeps going to the back of the ring, and he's beating up the ECW guys and the WCW guys, and he had turned heel, and like no one was signing up for him as a heel. Like the crowd was just ready to cheer for him again. Like you had that feeling, dude. And when that fucking glass hit. Right. I swear to God, that place erupted I still have never seen it, but I was watching that and I recorded that shit, and I still have that on video.
Amazing.
To this, that's the only thing I ever have. I still have a few VHS tapes left, but that's the one wrestling. When I record, like the commercials on there at that time are still on there and everything. So it'd be a trip to see what the commercials were at that time.
What year was that? Like 2002?
That would have been 2000. He turned heel in 2002, right? Because that's when he beats The Rock, and him and Vince part. I don't know why they did that, but whatever. So yeah, that would have been that 2002, 2003,
somewhere in there
ish. Probably more 2002. Okay. Yeah.
Fascinating. Jeff Harris sends in $4.99. Thank you, Jeff. And says, have you guys ever watched Dark Side of the Ring series? Definitely a good watch. Also, 71 for a wrestler is pretty long. Rest in peace. Yeah. To your last point there, that's true. So many of these guys die in their 40s and 50s. And so for Hogan,
so for him to make 71 is really good.
It's still young, relatively, considering the average age for a man to die is, I think, 82 or something like that. But, my own parents died young. My dad was 69. My mom was 67. So 71, but he's
I keep forgetting your parents are passed. I keep forgetting that.
Yeah, they died 2.5 months apart from each other. And so 2011 was kind of a tricky year. But having said that, the 71, but at the same time, you don't see, like, a lot of these guys, like, they're big guys, how many, like, you look at the Big Show, and I'm not trying to get morbid, but how many, 80-year-old, 6'10", 300-pound guys do you see, right? Like, you don't see too many of these big these big guys, No. It could be the abuse of roids early in the career. It just could be the, whatever else they've done. They're big guys. Hogan was still a big guy, and so 71 is pretty good, as he says. But have we watched the Dark Side of the Ring series? I've never heard of it. Have you heard of it?
I've caught a few of them. Yeah. It's a good series. I think that's the one that Vice does, right?
I don't know.
If that's the one I'm thinking of, then that would be, yeah. If that's the only one that I can think of that maybe you're referencing to. But yeah, it's a very, very good series. If you ever get a chance, I think Cody Cody's the one who turned me on to that.
Mm.
The kid who was on last week or last time with us.
Yeah.
I was drawing a blank on his last name, Snyder.
Cody Snyder. Yeah.
Oh, getting old.
Yeah,
he's the one who turned me on to. He told me about Dark Side and Dark Side of the Ring, and yeah, it's very good. If that's the one that he referred me to, then that's the one he's got. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Foley sends in $5. Thank you. $5 Canadian, a fellow Canuck. Says, have you ever taken a trip to Cobb County? Ray,
Georgia?
He's what he's saying. Ray Trailer Boss Man was my fave. Had a good run with Hogan. I don't get.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there for work, for like my clients, like for houses that I do for my agents' listings. But yeah, but Big Boss Man, he's from Cobb County, Georgia.
There you go. Oliver Mercer, £10. Thanks, Oliver. Says, truly shocking towards Hulk, yet it was also shocking by Ozzy's passing as well. It was just the other week. At the time, I was at his last gig.
You know what, though? Leave it to Hogan, right? Ozzy dies, and then the day later, Hogan dies. Hogan was like, not going to work for me, brother.
Not going to work for me, brother. I'm going to
come on, dude. You can't even let Ozzy have his moment.
Can you imagine? Could you imagine? He says, what are your thoughts on Ozzy, Tony? Ozzy's passing.
Oh, man.
You were a huge fan.
No, I was not. I was a fan. Here's the thing. Look, growing up in the 80s, man, first of all, I had my own taste in music. I had my own rock bands that I was listening to, whether it was Motley Crue, Poison, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Metallica and whatnot. But I also listened to a lot of pop music. I was listening to the hip hop music of that time too, like the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, LL Cool J. I was a big fan of his music in the 80s. And then my parents, they were influencing me a lot of their, like the 70s classic rock music, like, Skinner, Floyd, Aerosmith, Doobie Brothers, Allman Brothers. My dad was a big Motown guy and doo-wop music and whatever. So there was just only so much music that I could listen to,
right.
But I knew who Black Sabbath was. And it wasn't like I was not a fan of them. I grew into listening to them more in like my 20s, like my later 20s, believe it or not. It wasn't like I didn't like Ozzy Osbourne. I knew who he was, obviously. I knew who their music. I knew Crazy Train. I knew Paranoid, War Pigs, whatever and whatnot. But I didn't. If I'm being honest, I didn't listen to them that much in the 80s. I don't know if you had friends like this. Like I had friends who were strictly metalheads. They didn't listen to anything else, all metal. I was very diverse with my music. You know what I mean? Like I said, I was very influenced by my parents' music and the music they were listening to. I was also, into my own music as well. Plus, don't forget the 90s, 90s, Nirvana and the 90s hip hop music that we had, at that time with Bone, Wu-Tang and whatever, and the R&B music that we had, so I was there's just like only so many, there's only so much music I can listen to on a weekly basis. And I just didn't really, I didn't just stay into like one channel. I didn't just do metal. Whereas I had a lot of friends who did that. They just only listened to metal. They were big Ozzy Osbourne fans and Black Sabbath fans. And look, I love Black Sabbath. They're a great classic rock band. I listened to them as I got older, and I appreciate their music and everything that Ozzy and them did. I mean, they are the godfather of metal. Some can argue that, and debate that or whatever. But yeah, it's crazy to think that he did his last performance and then 2 weeks later he's gone. Yeah. And it was so hard. Oh my God. It was so heartbreaking today to see Sharon. I don't know if you watched any of the,
I saw a few of the clips. Yeah.
And talk about dude, if I had a goal in life to have the kind of relationship with someone, it's that. When you watch how heartbroken she is, dude, I couldn't help but sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to fucking cry here in a minute if I keep watching this shit. Because she loved that man unconditionally.
Yep.
She battled all his demons from the drug abuse, the alcohol abuse. That's not easy. That's not easy to stick by someone's side. And man, did she stick by his side, to the very end. And to watch her today, my heart breaks for her. You can tell she lost her best friend. She lost, the love of her life. And when people sit there and talk about couples goals right? You see all that stuff on social media on time. That's a couple's goal. Like that right there. That's how you know someone is loved, when you see that kind of reaction from her today. And
it's true.
It's sad, man. It sucks that unfortunately we don't get to live forever. And that's the hard part about being in love and falling in love, is that, and you ride that wave to the end with someone, that's the end game. Someone's going to go before someone, and
either divorce or death.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean by divorce. I meant like, if
no,
ride
I
the
know.
wave,
I just meant, yeah.
To the end with someone, and you stay together and you stick through it like the end is someone's going to die before the other person. And that's just, it sucks.
It does suck. It's I wasn't, I'm not an Ozzy Osbourne fan, but I didn't really listen to him or follow Black Sabbath. That was more my brother's. But
the Paranoid album.
There you go. But certainly, again, just like most things, he crossed the threshold of his own, side of entertainment and show business, which is music, into the popular zeitgeist. Not everybody does that. There's lots of musicians out there. There's many, many more musicians and many, many, many more actors and many, many more filmmakers and wrestlers and, what have you, that you'll never know their name. But every now and then, there's enough, obviously, that do cross the threshold. And Ozzy was one. And, I like some of his music. I do. I can't say I was a huge fan, but you don't have to be a huge fan to understand that when he died, a legend has passed. And it's, I recognize his cultural footprint, his pop culture footprint, his impact on metal, and of course, Black Sabbath, and all the drugs and the drinking, and why he was kicked out and or left or whatever. And he was huge. He's one of those guys from that time.
He's a big reason.
It's huge.
He's a big reason why that my band, Motley Crue, that I was a huge fan of Motley Crue as a kid in the 80s. Obviously, it was too young when they toured together, but I mean, he helped Motley, when they toured together. He put them on the map and got their music out. Because remember, back in the day, that's how you got your music out there. We didn't have, right. I mean, you had radio, obviously.
Yes.
But to really get your product out there, you had to tour. And I mean, think about Motley Crue at that time. These are young guys, and they're beginning to make a little bit of naming for themselves. And fucking Ozzy Osbourne says, "Hey man, let's go on the road." I mean, that had to have been fucking insane for them.
Insane.
Like fucking Ozzy Osbourne's asking us to tour,
insane.
Insane.
Yeah, absolutely insane. JB,
did you ever go to the Ozfest?
No.
I went to one Ozfest years
ago.
ago.
I did not.
Fucking 90s, maybe early 2000s, something
I
like
did
that.
not. I
can't remember. When the fuck were those? Someone help me. My memories. What's crazy? I can remember a lot of shit, but then I forget a lot of shit.
Well, it's, you're 87 now. JBeach12078 says, Dave, I remember when Hogan pinned the Sheik for the title. I've seen Hogan wrestle Bundy twice at Madison Square Garden, once in a steel cage. I remember seeing that on TV. You were there? Nice. Amazing. Absolutely amazing, nice. J Beach. Absolutely amazing. Let me see here. 2 more minutes, and then we will call it. That's a nice 90-minute show.
Nice.
Tabitha Short says, I love Ozzy. I grew up with him because of my dad. Rest in peace to my dad and Ozzy. They are rocking out together somewhere. They are rocking out together somewhere. Absolutely.
I'm picturing Ozzy right now in front of the piano, fighting with Frank Sinatra and who's going to sing next.
There you go. Chester Franklin Jr. says, Ozzy is a WWE Hall of Famer.
He is.
I didn't know that.
That is true. Yes,
I did not know
very
that.
True. I forgot that. Yeah, that is true. I think that was during...
Leave it to Chester to pick that one out.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chester, I believe that was during the Osbourne TV show run when they made their appearances in WWE. I could be wrong on the timing on that, but I think that was during that run when they showed up in WWE.
Brandon Collins
Did you ever
says,
watch that show, The Osbournes?
A few episodes.
Right? Right? I didn't stick with it. Like, I mean, that was kind of like the beginning years of reality television. And I was like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah.
Not like with the Osbournes, but just reality television in general.
Right. Yeah. Ozfest was 96 to 2018.
Yeah. And I'm thinking the one Ozfest I went to was 99. I'm almost like I have memories of that, like some good and some not so good. We'll just leave it at that.
Amazing. I love this. Jay Beach says, my Uncle Sal left me at the seats so he could sneak down and take pictures of Gorilla Monsoon. Amazing. Nice. What
I only went to one WWF event live.
I did too.
And it was a Royal Rumble. It was a Royal Rumble, and it just happened to be the fucking one Rumble where Austin was a heel.
I went to one in the I went to a house show in the early 90s where nobody good was performing, and it was like the weaker part of the roster. And they even had everybody in the place chant different names and I was like, why are we chanting different names when these wrestlers are not coming out? And my stepmother was the one who took me because my dad was too busy. So my stepmother took me to this wrestling match, and it was WWF, and I can't remember who was there, but it wasn't like big names. Maybe house show isn't the right thing, but whatever those shows were in the early 90s where you could go see it, but like the big stars weren't there. I don't know. Maybe there was one or two that were fairly well known, but I remember I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11. And an announcer came over the speakers and just said, folks, I mean, he got the whole crowd to start chanting things like Macho, Macho, or Hogan, whatever it was. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, they're going to fucking come out? And come out? No. And it was my stepmother who worked in media who turned to me and said, I know what they're doing. They're recording this so they could play it.
Use it
later on other broadcasts. And of course, she was all like, those bastards. And I'm like, well, it's kind of cool. Well, now
that's creative.
It is.
It's very creative,
but that's
for when you're marketing your brand.
That's part of the magic. That's part of, so, now maybe not, they might not need to do that anymore, but certainly back in the day, when you hear like Hogan, that might not be live. Just saying.
Well, if he was at an event, what they probably did was dubbed it, meaning you had the crowd there, plus they're using that to make it sound more,
yeah, but he wasn't there.
The speaker. No. I meant when he was there.
Oh, I see.
When he's at him. Oh, I'm guarantee just knowing the way, because there was another little trick that some people don't know, that if they weren't getting the crowd reaction sometimes, I believe this was during the taped days of Monday Night Raw, before they started to do live, and they would creative, but they would use a blow dryer and blow into the microphone like to create that sound of like a really loud crowd. And they used that sound effect to be played as almost like a backtrack along with the audience that was there if the audience wasn't giving it to them. So I guarantee what you guys experienced 100%, just knowing that would be a trick McMahon would do, that when we would be just watching an event, right, live, just to give it that more epic sound, they would probably dub it with the crowd audience, right? Because again, this is 1980 microphones too. You got to keep that in mind. We didn't have the technology like we did today.
Right.
But they probably did both, right? They had a little bit of what they recorded at your thing, and they dubbed it into what we were watching live on the television. I'll guarantee it. No McMahon's.
I can't remember who wrestled that night. I cannot remember. Like, it might have been like, not that he's not a name, but it might have been like Honky Tonk, and maybe, like he's a name, but he's not like, Macho Man, Hogan, Andre. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was more of the sort of just the step down from the major stars. And
so as a voice actor, do you have any impersonations? Like, can you do any of the wrestlers or? No,
I mean, I can do so. As a voice, there are some voice actors that are good impressionists. And therefore they can mimic, and again, it's not just the voice, it's the character themselves, right? I mean, fellow Canadian VO actor Eric Bauza is the new voice of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. And so that's not just about going, what's up? That's all about character. So you have to have the voice, but you also have to speak like that for, half an hour. And so there are some voice actors that are great at impressionists, not just impressions, but they understand the nuances so they can, you know what I mean? And then there are voice actors like me I don't fancy myself a good impressionist, but I can do like caricatures, right? You know, like, you know, I mean, that doesn't sound like Donald Trump,
Okay.
but you know who I'm doing, right? Or like, I mean, everybody's got an Arnold, right? You know, or, you know, it's not, I'm not an impressionist. I wouldn't say that I can do impressions, because not every voice actor can. But when it comes
I mean,
to
I'm sure like us, I'm sure you did a Macho Man.
well, yeah, well,
I'm
exactly.
sure
Well, that's
you
what I
did.
mean. That's what I mean. Exactly. It's just the, you know, I'm about to, oh yeah. I mean, everybody does that, right? You know, and so, but in terms of
Yeah,
like
there
actual
you go.
impressions, no, I don't.
Well, no, I
don't
can't
do
do that.
impressions. Yeah, no, I'm not an impressionist. I'm more of a. I can do a lot of different characters, you know, all different kinds of voices and characters. But if somebody said, you know, we need you to do, you know, Daffy Duck, and because we're going to hire you as the next Daffy Duck, which they wouldn't do without hearing me first, I'd be like, I'm out. You know what I mean? As much as I envy fellow VO actors like Eric Bauza, I would, if I could do Daffy Duck, man, he's my favorite Looney Tunes character. I would. They're made. I might get really annoying on how often I pull that out. But yeah, no, I'm not an impressionist.
I bet you if you spent some time practicing, you probably could.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure, because I understand.
Well, are we good? Did we get all the questions? 'Cause
We
I gotta
did.
get going.
We did. Folks, that's going to do it for this episode of Two Dudes and Some Bullshit. Thank you for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. If you're watching after the fact, jump into the comment section. Let Tony and I know your thoughts on Hulk Hogan. The legendary Hulk Hogan passed away at the age of 71. Truly, you know, if you grew up in the 80s, if you remember that time, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. We would really like to know. Thank you to the moderators. Thank you to the super chats that came in tonight. Really, really appreciate it. Don't forget, the Development Funds campaign for the house on Port Robinson Road is active. It's been a slow last couple of days, so I'd really like to pick things up. So if you're thinking about donating, if you've forgotten about it and you want to, do it tonight or do it tomorrow. I'd really, really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. The link is pinned to the top of the chat there, but it's also pinned to the description as well. Tony, any last things you'd like to say? Tony, any last things you'd like to say?
No, this was fun. I had a blast going down memory lane, and can you hear